The business of medicine is constantly changing. The review by Resolve discusses current contract issues for physicians, compensation trends, and tips for a successful career. Every physician's contract and career is different, and nothing in this episode should be considered legal advice. If you have specific questions about your career, please consult with an attorney. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to the review. We're here again with Lauren Kaufman. We're going to talk about recruitment agreements for physicians. This tends to be an area where I think it's not intuitive, right? As far as why there's a recruitment agreement that's accompanying an employment contract. And so we have a lot of clients with confusion on that. Give us the overall structure. Like what does it look like? Why are they there? Just going to give us that high level.
Sure. So a recruitment agreement is a situation where generally the physician is going to be joining a private practice, but the private practice maybe doesn't have those upfront funds to kind of offer either salary or other incentives. So they're working with a local hospital to kind of front some of that money or all of it. It could be either. And in that situation, the hospital is essentially acting as the bank and loaning the money to the practice to pay to the physician. And then in exchange, the physician has an obligation to both the practice and the hospital in separate contracts.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to try to zoom that out a little bit. So it's almost like a triangle, right? We've got the physician, we've got the private practice that they're going to join, and then we've got the hospital or the health system in town. So the physician's going to go work for the private practice, right? Private practice says we don't have $500,000 to recruit an orthopedic surgeon like we want to, but the hospital values all those surgeries that are going to come into the system, and so they're saying, "Hey, we'll lend that money, right, to make sure that this orthopedic surgeon comes to town." And it's not just ortho; it could be any specialty.
Right.
But for that example, okay. So you mentioned that the physician has liability to both the employer and the hospital. Tell me about that part in the recruitment agreement. Like, what does that look like?
And so there's the recruitment agreement and then the employment agreement with the private practice. Yep. And so as far as how that kind of happens, you're always going to have to sign that recruitment agreement first before you sign your private practice agreement.
And why is that?
The recruitment agreement is saying, I wouldn't come to this private practice if the recruitment agreement wasn't offering this compensation or these incentives.
So it's contingent on that happening. Okay.
So in theory, you sign that private practice agreement first, but the recruitment agreement doesn't matter.
Right.
Almost always simultaneously,
Sure.
Recruitment agreement and the private practice. But I think that sometimes there is a bit of a misunderstanding as far as kind of actually legally what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And then, so as part of that, the hospital would say, we're going to give you, like you said, $500,000. In exchange, you have to stay in our community for 3 years and provide call coverage at our hospital. And so that's your obligation with the hospital. And then separately, you have your obligation with the private practice, talking about your day-to-day, what your, malpractice insurance, all of those other type of just general kind of employment details would be in that document.
Yeah. So you have, if you're the physician, you have all your normal responsibilities of the practice, right? I have to take so much call and I've got to, whatever, work 5 days a week, all the normal things, right? But then you also have this obligation to the hospital to say, hey, I'm going to stay in town for, let's say, 3 years.
Right.
Does the hospital care if you leave that private practice?
It doesn't.
Yeah, they don't care.
I mean, they want notice.
Of course.
There's going to be a notice requirement, but that is always the one thing that is nice about a recruitment agreement is they just want you to stay in the community, whether that be a definition by zip codes or counties, which is generally outlined in the recruitment agreement. So they're like, we just want you here.
Right.
We don't care where you're at. Simultaneously, there's also generally going to be something in your recruitment agreement that you can't have a non-compete.
Correct.
And so a lot of times you'll have to be, you have to make sure that that's not included. And sometimes private practices will kind of add in that language that the non-compete, doesn't impact if you leave in those first 3 years.
Yeah.
And then, the 3 years and 1 day, it's going to be.
Yeah, now we have the non-compete
exactly.
again. Right, yeah.
But, in theory, you could stay as long as you continue that obligation to the hospital if you wanted to go to a different practice or whatever the situation might be.
Right. So as long as you come to town and you're in town, or the zip codes, right? In this example, we don't care who you work with. Private practice 1, 2, or 3 doesn't matter to us. You can switch between those. Now, the private practices don't like that. They want you to stay there, right? Yeah. So you have to be careful on if there's other strings attached, non-compete or liquidated damages or other things like that. Okay. So when let's say you do have to leave, right? Let's say you have to leave town. how are they recouping the amounts that they've paid into the private practice? How does the physician have liability on that?
Well, they generally, and something we'd want to negotiate as far as some kind of termination exceptions. But if you've gotten $500,000 every year that you're there, generally we're going to want to work out something with the promissory note or that it's forgiven monthly,
right,
or at the very least annually, monthly ideally, so that you're kind of getting credit for each time you're there. But in that situation, if you leave, you owe back $500,000.
Right.
So it's not an insignificant obligation the physician is taking on.
Right. And the guarantee amounts can vary, right?
Yes.
I mean, they can be a guarantee for 1 year, right? And then they expect you to kind of be on your own feet and, have your patient volume. They can be 2 years. They're also going to be offsetting collections that come in, right? So if you, for easy example purposes, you got a guarantee of $500,000 and you collect $200,000. Well, there's only $300,000 there of deficit, right? That you're going to be paying back. So it's really an unknown, I think, for the physician of how much risk am I taking? We don't really know until you get to the end of it. So
right, and sometimes it can be millions, or it could be 10,000 for moving. Right. So it does really run the gamut as far as things that a recruitment agreement can cover.
Right.
And the biggest thing is the physician knowing that they've got these kind of dual obligations that yes exist together, but are very much separate and distinct as well.
Right. So the summary on this one is recruitment agreements are a little bit tricky, right?
Yes.
If you're joining a private practice that has a hospital, supplying some of the funding, you need to be very careful on where your liabilities are, right? Not only to the practice, but to the health system, making sure the time frame is comfortable for you. Anything else they should take away?
If they come to us, bring both the documents so we can look at them.
Yeah, it's hard to give advice on half the picture.
You're right.
Yeah.
So that helps us get the whole picture. And that also, one of the things to be mindful of is if that private practice would potentially just lay you off, terminate you without cause, we'd want to have some protections where they're shifting the liability to them then for that money you would owe to the hospital because the physician is leaving through no fault of their own at that point.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Very good advice. Appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
All right.